Why, hello. My name is Christian Maynard, and this is one of the first interviews throughout the Cannabis Research Conference. And I am here with, could you introduce yourself?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
What you do, your background, and kind of what brought you out here?
Yeah, I'm Lily. I'm a first-year PhD student at the THC lab, or the Health and Cognition lab at WSU. My background, I come from a very interesting background. I did go to UW. I got a BS in psychology, and I'm interested in cognition, mental illness, and I found that the cannabis lab would be just for me.
Thank you for having me. I'm Brianna Jernigan. I'm from Southern California, so we have a lot of experience when it comes to cannabis, but I would say it's been very recreational. So I started as a bartender. I got to work for the first place where you could consume and eat at in a restaurant. So going from recommending cannabis in store to then recommending it and seeing consumption live. So being able to see that really teaches you how important it is to not only be trained, to have education, and to also see how we consume cannabis so differently, and how any sort of knowledge can really impact that. And based on that experience, I decided to go get my master's in cannabis science and therapeutics. And there I really just learned about how big of a gap there is, not only between healthcare and cannabis, but also between the people creating the policies and the ones actually consuming the plant. So while there is so much to learn and there are so many variables when you not only think about the science, the policy, the retail aspect of it, so I think a lot of the journey has been from how do you create this into a retail environment to combining it into some sort of healthcare and wellness aspect as well. So that has really just been my journey. My goal is for bartenders to be certified. There are 4 states now I learned this weekend, which is great. So it's time for California, as well as standardization and labeling, and really just being able to figure out what these templates are, what questions we need to ask, and how to just be a more professionalized society in general.
Yeah, my name's Ed Norris. I'm Vice President of Operations at CO2 Trust. We are a business that works on deploying biochar wherever we can to try to capture carbon and get soils to be in a better place for like 1,000-year future for humanity. Yeah, I think we got involved with the cannabis industry because it's a really valuable spot where a lot of interest is in yield increase and how much money is being spent on how it's grown. And just making sure people know that the investments they're making can actually improve soil life and can improve the product that they're putting in people's lungs.
That seems pretty important, especially if you are going to consume it. How do we make it safe from point A to point Z?
Yeah, there's a lot of like chemically laced product that will grow, but isn't necessarily. It's the same with food. You can make food grow, but it might not have what you need in it.
I am Erica Lutz. I am a second year at Washington State University in the experimental psychology program, where we study cannabis. We are in the Health and Cognition lab, where we primarily study cannabis and other cannabinoids. Most of my focus is on emotion regulation and substance use, as well as how we can improve affect and emotion regulation.
That's pretty exciting stuff. I know we just got done from your conference presentation, and it was practically a standing room ovation and stuff, so really high praise there.
Thank you. Depressant-like effects, again, this is with rodents. It's good for pain. It can decrease anxiety, decrease blood pressure, can decrease intraocular pressure, so things like glaucoma. It can potentially kill cancer cells and be neuroprotective.
I guess, could you tell me about your thoughts on like legalization as it is in the United States? Like, just broadly.
I think making it fully illegal is sort of like, I think a little bit too restrictive, in my opinion. I think regardless, a big thing that I believe in is like, regardless, you're gonna do it if you wanna do it, and you're gonna find the way to do it. Maybe it might stop the couple people that are like trying to make it very easy. Like they want it to be convenient so they can just like hop into a dispensary and like do it. But I think in general, those that are like trying to smoke weed, they will. I also think like there's a huge influence in the country when you see like other kids your age, or I guess other 21-year-olds your age, smoking weed legally. You're gonna be like, well, I mean, like, they're doing it and it's totally fine, so like you're gonna wanna do it too. And you don't think that it's dangerous just because it's illegal in your state. So I feel like it just doesn't even work when some states are illegal and some states aren't.
I think when it comes to legalization, once again, just even within a retail environment or within any company, departments aren't talking. We have that on a larger scale. And we just had this conversation last night with some people that are in policy, and just saying the people in policy aren't, and it's a very general, ambiguous thing at the moment, but the general census of talking with people is the people even in the policy departments can't get a hold of the plant-touching data, and vice versa, or even the willingness and the want to. I believe in descheduling. I think that it should be a state issue, at least for now. And I think just the more that I've traveled, I've realized that when you go outside of the country, you realize how differently we are viewed as an entirety, and you realize how differently you feel about the view of the U.S. and from where your state is. And I think that your state has a lot more impact on the local levels, the police community, your healthcare providers, and how you're able to go get that access. And I think those are the systems that, at least in the beginning, should have some sort of control with where we're at the moment. I'm very fearful of legalization in the sense that it will be removed from the people who, federal agents can't even consume cannabis. And I do think it is important for at least 3/4 of a team to have been consumers themselves. I don't think everyone needs to be a consumer, but I do think that having that experience is very important. And I think that if federal agents can't consume, I think that there's just so much red tape with that, and I think that that's just taking it further out of the hands of the people who are actually aware of it. So I do think it should be state legalized. I think it should be as far as federally goes, it should be, the prohibition should definitely have ended a very long time ago, and then I think from there it should be down to states. But I do think when it comes to the federal government, I think most of what they should be involved with is ensuring that research is being done, that there is at least in every category that we're at least covering, whether it be purchasing decisions, whether it be agriculture. I think there should at least be one research at least a year funded in each of the different departments, and I think that's just where the federal control should come from. Is we can't continue to have these very strong opinions and not have read the literature, or not have, you say we can't do this because there's no research, but then make people jump through 20 different hoops to get any of the research done.
There's no research on it, and you're not allowed to do research,
but it's
except if you go through all of this, and maybe 10 years later you'll finally get approved for everything, and you'll get low quality cannabis from the one lab or the handful of labs we allow now.
And that's up until a few years ago, all the research we had. And this is actually what really, a few years ago, it kind of got me very off track, and I'm just now starting to come back in. But everything that I read was just saying more research needs to be done. But then in my master's program, we learned that all the research that we had was only from one college, and it was from a controlled environment. All the plants are 13 to 70%. Essentially, none of it is what is being on the shelves. There was some sort of sentence in there about how it cannot be from a purchase dispensary, but that is the people that are consuming it. So I think that really it made me question everything that I'd ever read, and I can't apply that. And also, what is a population sample and it made me just feel, even as someone that enjoys reading the literature, that I couldn't even trust what I was reading, because it was only coming from, again, one place. We're not comparing growing conditions. We're not comparing what's actually on the shelves. These percentages are half of what's being sold to us anyways.
I think it's, for cannabis specifically, I think it's reasonable, but unreasonable at the same time. We're dealing with, it would be better with clear and respectful clarity from the federal government. But largely, the distinction between states seems like it's actually giving us an ability to see how each state wants to run it. I think Oregon specifically is doing a lot to make it kind of friendly to growers and friendly to the people who are involved with the production, as well as generating tax revenue and kind of respecting the people who are going to do it anyways. And I think that's a valuable way to look at it versus, certain ways that Colorado has done it. It's been a little bit more you have to have a good amount of money to get into it to begin with. I know California has a bit of a blend, and there's rules for letting people grow at home. I'm not sure exactly, but same with Washington. There's a little bit more. I think that's great. And then having some level of not needing to worry about the federal government kind of, lurking behind you would be great.
Cracking down at any moment.
Yeah. Also, to the point of we know a lot more now than we did 20 years ago, and we would know a lot more if we hadn't, outright made it difficult to research even. And there's just a lot of gumming up the works of understanding that is unnecessary, that it's not even the federal government, but really at the state level, just being more pushing more of what we don't know as the problem.
Personally, I think it should be legalized everywhere. I find that when we are legalizing it, it tends to decrease use because kind of like alcohol, when it's legal, it's like, oh, well, that's fine. I can access it now.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Decrease
Yes.
use for everyone or?
For adolescents specifically. I know Lily in my lab is concerned about the adolescents, as am I, especially with things like edibles and things like that. But legalizing it also allows people to get it from a known source. People aren't getting it from some guy on the street that may or may not have other things with it, to know what the product is and things like that. It should be legalized and regulated formally, I think.
Do you have like any major concerns with legalization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think maybe it's not really relevant to legalization. However, like media exposure on cannabis use, I think we've sort of like glamorized it a little bit and made it like look cool. So I'm worried about like adolescent use mainly. So I don't know if necessarily legalization is the reason why there's more media exposure, but it could be. But I am sort of worried about like more adolescent use in states that do have it legalized, which again, I don't know the statistics. Maybe is completely opposite. Maybe more adolescents are using in a more restrictive state. However, I am worried about adolescent use, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I mean, I think most people, that's kind of
Are
one
worried
thing
about
most
it.
people can agree on of
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe adults should use it or should have access to use it, but definitely not adolescents. I find that that's usually the medium opinion.
Yeah, I guess like define adolescent, like 18 plus is like one thing. Chill out, Erica. 18 plus is one thing, because I feel like there are other countries that allow 18 plus cannabis use.
Yeah, I think Canada
Depends in
has.
Europe or whatever. Yeah.
Canada has
Canada.
like territories and stuff that allow it.
So I am worried about like middle schoolers and like early high schoolers doing it, which is like,
I wish I even had I could just go in for fact. I think it's unfair that any states don't have rights to this, and I think that's kind of like where I have difficulty with saying I don't want it to be federally legalized. Obviously, every state should have it, every country should have it. In the opiate crisis, we see how bad things currently are, and I think that's just where we need to land. And I think it is being treated so much more like a legalizing a policy type thing. So I think that is what keeps people in different levels. We still have people in prison because of this, but I've been on a magazine cover smoking cannabis. So, and it's not necessarily answering your question particularly, but I think that's part of the issue, is that it's whenever you read something different, the reason why this is illegal is different. And even getting into the Second Amendment laws, right? So any cannabis user is an unlawful user, but then when it comes to alcohol or substances, you have to have been proven to have some sort of addiction, have to have been arrested. There has to have been something that you did that shows you cannot handle this. But when it comes to cannabis, you are in general an unlawful user. So in order for me to answer that question, we first have to break down what these definitions are, and then I think apply them by location. And I do think everyone should have access in the places that don't. Kind of just with a different topic that I guess I won't get into, but California welcomes places that people from other places that can't consume it themselves. But I do think everyone should have access. And I guess the last thing I'll say is the danger of that is this is why Delta 8, especially in gas stations, is able to prevail. Because, my grandma was living in Texas before she passed, and when I got to her house, so much of your CBD store was there, and I had no idea that my grandma had even believed in me, or had thought that my master's was anything. I thought she just thought I was a cannabis user or whatever. And for me, I had a problem with Delta 8, but I was grateful to know that at least she was able to get something instead of
opiates.
If you saw the drugs that they were giving her and how skinny she was and all the things in the opiates and how much it had killed her body and how much she should have definitely got to continue living. So at least, in that regard, right, that's where this conversation is just difficult, because do I like Delta 8? It's hard to trust because there's no regulations on it. But then, however, in her case, in Schertz, Texas, that was at least the only thing she could get. So, the CBD, I posted a meme a few years ago, and it was the CBD didn't work, and he's well, no one told you to get it from a gas station.
And it's I did, yeah,
It just gets kind of like,
But also, like, can you blame them? Because at least that's an option. So it's until we come up with a better, this is how it should be done, then at least, and I think that's just how I feel with a lot of it. Like, at least we have this, and even when I was like working at the cafe and just trying to remind people of the responsibility and like the privilege that we had, like people felt really hard for us to get to this point.
yeah.
So it's like there's a responsibility that we all need to remember that we have.
No, that's very important. Yeah, there's a long history to get here currently, where there's actually a Cannabis Research Conference, and we're not all being arrested as we walk out of here.
I don't know if there's anything that stands out in the current tense of like we shouldn't be doing that. I think there is something that's sort of sad, is that, you know, if someone were to want to use cannabis to, you know, deal with one form of life or another, deal with the same way that they might have a drink after a day of work, depending on what state they're in, they would go to jail. And like that's really kind of horrendous to think that that's the way that it just is for a lot of the US. And realistically, it creates this sort of open door policy where like the police or, you know, federal regulators can kind of just choose to go after you because this moment presents itself to be like, I don't have a reason to harass you, but look, it turns out that it's like the same reason why the sweeping drug laws in the 70s were to, you know, dissuade political resistance from the people in power. So like that's still present in the states that just kind of outlaw it broadly. But outside of that, I think, you know, the states going their own way, mostly states with ballot measures, are able to kind of make up way for themselves. And it feels like we're not, a lot of places are very sane. This is kind of ironic because cannabis is a mind-altering substance, but yeah, I think that we have the pathway. We just need some level of like respect for states' rights from the federal government.
Inconsistency is problematic. Where we live in Washington is very close to the Idaho border, and I know folks that have definitely taken products into Idaho that are not considered legal, and that can be problematic. I also know that people from Idaho come to Washington to get products so that they can use them in their home. So the inconsistency is problematic and definitely causes trouble where there could be no troubles from. We also see that it's safer than alcohol. And alcohol, you can go anywhere and use alcohol. So why can we not use cannabis safely in our homes?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I always hear, I don't know if you've heard this statement, but being on the border area, it's like, okay, you go over to Idaho for the tobacco and you come over to Washington for the cannabis.
That's exactly
and that's
right.
how you do it. Are there any states that you see as a model?
No idea.
No?
Absolutely no idea. I'm also underage,
So you want to know about these models.
I don't know anything about what I'm saying, and I shouldn't know about anything that I'm saying.
And you've never consumed,
I've
so
never,
it's great
ever,
to hear that.
ever done anything bad. I'm actually amazing. But to be more serious, I think, I guess I just don't really know what each state's policies are. And I don't really know what's going on in that state to answer the question. But if there is a state that allows, I guess, like legalization and adult use, but they have like a good control over it, or maybe they, I don't know, monitor more.
I think I would no one state right now I think has it all. I think that they're very amazing states. I would pick apart different things. I was just looking at the New York website last night, and I got to do some training some years ago in New York, and that was just very confusing because you would see stores that are dispensaries that were like bright, and like there would be cops right out front of them and not arresting them, and then they were very just picky and choosy with who they decided to shut down. So I didn't understand it in the beginning, and so I can't speak much on New York, but like they have a free certification program. So now they have a 15-hour certification where if a person's to work under a licensed dispensary, they have to have the certification, and they're giving it for free, and figuring out that model is like I signed up for that course last night, so I'm going to be taking that. I think when it comes to, I did see a sign out here yesterday that they were selling tobacco in the dispensary, so that was a little.
That was weird to see.
Did you see it too?
I did. I was like, there's cigarettes in here? What?
No, I guess I kind of want to say, but and then I think with California, there's some great models, but I would say for California, more of just our field marketing abilities and how we've been able to get more into like festivals and things like that. And when I went to Colorado, I would say that the dispensary like employees were just very knowledgeable in the way that they kind of like had like the flow is really well set up, but I think that we still have so much more work to go, and I think there's a really big difference with how it's treated as a commerce right now, and we need to have some large ideas of how to make a middle ground of a wellness space that still combines healthcare, still combines the retail and recreational aspect, and I think we need to pick apart from a lot of different industries, and the cannabis, the way that the business is set up is just is it being set up as a business, or is it being set up as like a kind of like a drive-through? So
I love the way Oregon handled it, because I think the biggest problem with cannabis criminality is that it emboldens the black market, emboldens illegal like activity that always has knock-on effects. That if you're going to have someone who's enriched by selling illegal drugs, those people are going to commonly be doing other illegal things that people don't agree with, and you're emboldening them and funding them to do not only that, but like, you know, bad practices, unregulated practices of how things are grown, non-lab testing. So like, I do think Oregon does a great job to just, like, the focus seems to me to be about, you know, empowering the individual to grow their own if they want to, not commercialization specifically, which I think other states have kind of leaned into more commercialization and like, we're gonna make a bunch of money off of this, which is fine, you know, there's money to be made in that way, and if they're going to create a path, I just don't think that's a great way to do it. To that end, I do think that California has done a better job to take funding from the sale and put it into research, not just policing. And they also do it for policing. Oregon focuses on policing. There's a portion of our percentage of the taxes that go to policing. And some of it is supposed to go to programs to help with addiction, but that's kind of broad. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is like, incentivizing commercialization is not a pathway to success, in my opinion. It's a knock-on effect that happens in any enterprise, but focusing on that kind of emboldens, you know, like Marlboro to get involved with something like this. I think the banking industry needs to be reevaluated. There's not really a clean way because of how interstate lines work with banking. But even if that was where the federal government could step in and say, like, okay, well, you can actually move these products across state lines, or the funds for these products across state lines. Yeah, right now it's just
I'd
a
make
bunch of
things
people,
a little bit easier, right?
Yeah, at least safer for the dispensaries that are having to keep large sums of money all the time, and depending on what state they are, there's been crime associated with that as well.
Well, any cash business is kind of,
At risk in that way.
What a good question. To my knowledge, I once upon a time would have said Oregon, but that does not seem to be going as well as it should. But I know that they decriminalized a lot of things very rapidly. So that plays a little bit of a role in that and some of the intermixing of things. I do think quality-wise, Oregon is leading the way. Dispensaries do things a little bit differently depending on where you are, but places like Oregon will have one large jar of that strain, and they will give you whatever amount you want out of that container, as opposed to places in Washington where everything is prepackaged. It came from somewhere, it's been in a bag for who knows how long, it's dry, it's crunchy, maybe it's mildewy. There's a lot more issues with consistency of quality, and I think that that could be controlled, and that would also help the regulation pieces as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And Lily.
Yes, Lily.
Nice. Yeah, this was great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate that.
I hope my answers were fine.
No, that makes sense. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you,
And
Christian.
yeah, thank you, Bree.
well, thank you so much, Ed.
Yeah.
I truly appreciate it. And
Thank you. That was wonderful. I appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, and that's my question. So
Well, fantastic.
appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.